He was the president who tried to redraw the world, the scholar-in-chief who believed ideas were stronger than armies, and the idealist whose visions won a war but shattered his health. Woodrow Wilson, the academic who rose from Princeton's halls to the White House, carried America into World War I, crafted the League of Nations, and reshaped global diplomacy forever. But behind the stiff collar, behind the professorial voice and uncompromising principles, lived a father whose private world was far more fragile than the history books reveal. Wilson had 3 daughters, Margaret, Jessie, and Eleanor, and each of them lived in the long shadow of a man consumed by national duty and personal ambition. They saw the human Wilson, not the historical one. They witnessed the toll of war on his conscience, the strain of politics on his marriage, and the collapse of his health after the stroke that left the nation wondering who truly led the country. While Woodrow Wilson tried to build peace abroad, his daughters struggled for identity at home. One devoted herself to music and spiritual purpose. One became a social reformer, pushing for causes her father often resisted. One entered the White House as First Lady in all but name. Not by choice, but by necessity. Their stories are not the stories of glamorous presidential children. They are stories of sacrifice, emotional tension, and the heavy weight of living inside a household ruled by intellect, ambition, and illness. Tonight, we go beyond the president to uncover the intimate legacy of Woodrow Wilson and the 3 daughters who inherited both his brilliance and the burdens he never meant to leave behind. Number 3. Margaret Woodrow Wilson. Margaret Woodrow Wilson, born on April 16, 1886, was the eldest daughter of Woodrow Wilson, and the one who most directly inherited his introspective nature. Serious, reflective, and artistic, Margaret grew up in a household where books were sacred, intellect was currency, and emotion was often kept behind strict doors. While her father was shaping students at Princeton into scholars, Margaret was shaping herself into something far more fragile. A young woman searching for purpose beneath the weight of a brilliant but emotionally distant parent. When Woodrow Wilson became president in 1913, Margaret was suddenly thrust into a spotlight she never wanted. The press followed her, society watched her, and the White House became a gilded cage. After the death of her mother, Eleanor Wilson, in 1914, Margaret's role changed overnight. With no First Lady in the White House, she stepped forward to take on many of the public responsibilities, hosting receptions, greeting diplomats, and maintaining social duties expected of a presidential family. But the burden was immense. Margaret was shy, musically gifted, and deeply spiritual, not a natural public figure. Behind the formal receptions and neatly posed photographs, she was struggling with loss and grappling with an identity swallowed by national expectation. After her father remarried, Edith Bowling Galt, and her younger sisters married, Margaret felt increasingly displaced from both the White House and her own life. She turned to music, her first true passion. A trained soprano, she pursued a career in performance and even recorded a series of early phonograph recordings. But something inside her remained unfulfilled. By the 1930s, Margaret underwent a profound spiritual transformation. She traveled to India, where she became a devoted follower of Sri Aurobindo, the Indian philosopher and spiritual leader. In a move that stunned the American press, Margaret renounced public life entirely and joined the Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry. There, she took on the name Nistha, meaning steadfastness, and dedicated the rest of her life to meditation, service, and spiritual study. She died in India in 1944, far from the White House, far from the political storms that shaped her early life, and far from the identity the world had tried to assign her. Margaret Woodrow Wilson's life was a quiet rebellion against the destiny she was born into. She was the daughter who stepped out of history's spotlight and into a search for inner truth. She left behind not a legacy of politics or diplomacy, but a legacy of spiritual courage, a journey defined not by power, but by peace. Number 2. Jessie Woodrow Wilson Sayre. Jessie Woodrow Wilson, born on August 28, 1887, was the daughter who inherited her father's fierce idealism, but channeled it into battles he could never fully understand. While Woodrow Wilson shaped nations from the White House, Jessie fought on the ground for the rights of workers, women, and the powerless. Among the three Wilson daughters, she was the reformer, bold, principled, and unafraid to confront injustice, even when it meant challenging her father's own political boundaries. Jessie grew up in an intensely intellectual household. Her father's world revolved around scholarship, moral certainty, and public duty. Jessie absorbed this atmosphere, but instead of turning inward like Margaret, she turned outward, toward society, activism, and the early waves of progressive reform. She attended Goucher College, developed a passionate belief in social justice, and joined settlement house movements that aimed to lift the working poor from the crises of urban America. Her father admired her conviction, but their worldviews often collided. Woodrow Wilson was cautious, pragmatic, and sometimes resistant to rapid social change. Jessie was impatient with injustice. She believed reform was not just necessary, it was urgent. In 1913, Jessie married Francis Bowes Sayre, an international law scholar and future diplomat. Their wedding, held in the White House, drew national attention. But unlike most presidential daughters, Jessie did not fade into ceremonial duties. Instead, she moved to Massachusetts and immersed herself in civic activism. Jessie became a powerful force in the League of Women Voters, fighting to secure women's full political participation. She demanded equal representation, economic protections for working mothers, and federal reforms that many in Washington, including at times her own father, considered too radical. During World War I, Jessie volunteered tirelessly for the American Red Cross, while also advocating for labor rights and improved social welfare programs. She was deeply shaped by the suffering she witnessed, and these experiences sharpened her belief that real democracy required justice at home, not just peace abroad. After the war, Jessie emerged as a leading voice within the Democratic Party. She helped mobilize women voters, pushed for progressive candidates, and championed anti-corruption reforms. Many party leaders believed she would eventually run for public office, perhaps even become one of the nation's first female governors or senators. But Jessie's future was cut tragically short. In January 1933, after undergoing abdominal surgery, she suffered sudden complications and died at the age of 45. Her death stunned the political world and devastated her family. Woodrow Wilson had already passed away 9 years earlier, but those who knew him believed Jessie was the child most like him, driven by principle, anchored in moral duty, and destined to shape the nation's future. Jessie Woodrow Wilson Sayre left behind a legacy of activism, courage, and unfinished progress. She was the Wilson daughter who fought hardest to make America live up to its ideals. The reformer whose voice echoed long after her own time ended. Number 1. Eleanor Randolph Wilson McAdoo. Eleanor Randolph Wilson, born on October 16, 1889, was the youngest of Woodrow Wilson's 3 daughters, the child who grew up closest to the center of her father's political universe, and ultimately became the emotional heartbeat of the Wilson White House. Unlike Margaret's introspection or Jessie's fiery reform spirit, Eleanor possessed a warm, engaging personality that made her naturally suited for public life. She was charming without effort, empathetic without calculation, and deeply protective of her father in ways that would define her adult years. Eleanor was only 24 when her father became president. With the White House still shrouded in Victorian formality, Eleanor brought a gentler, more modern presence. She accompanied her father to official events, greeted dignitaries, and often served as his companion at ceremonies. She stepped naturally into the ceremonial role of first daughter, comforting a president whose personal life was shadowed by grief and pressure. When her mother, Ellen Wilson, died in 1914, Eleanor became a crucial emotional bridge between Wilson and the world. Unlike Margaret, who withdrew, Eleanor leaned in, supporting her father through the most turbulent years of his presidency. Whether he was grappling with World War I, making the case for the League of Nations, or facing fierce opposition at home, Eleanor remained by his side. She was his softness in a world of relentless tension. Her compassion led her to volunteer for national service efforts during the war, boosting morale and supporting wartime charities. Yet, behind her public composure, Eleanor was navigating her own complexities. She fell in love with William Gibbs McAdoo, Wilson's Secretary of the Treasury, a man 26 years her senior, a widower, and one of the most powerful figures in the administration. Their 1914 marriage captured national attention and symbolized the merging of political loyalty with personal affection. As Eleanor transitioned into married life, the United States transitioned into war. McAdoo became a central figure in financing the war effort, while Eleanor supported wartime campaigns and sustained social duties expected of a woman in her position. But political alignment did not guarantee personal harmony. Their marriage grew strained over time, weighed down by age difference, long absences, and clashing ambitions. They divorced in 1934, a scandal in a society still deeply uncomfortable with the idea of divorce among prominent political families. After the divorce, Eleanor stepped away from public scrutiny and embraced a new identity: writer. She authored memoirs, biographies, and novels that offered both affection and ambiguity toward her father's legacy. In her writings, Eleanor revealed a man of deep conviction, intellectual severity, and emotional dependence, a president who leaned heavily on those closest to him, especially after his devastating stroke in 1919. During Wilson's final years, Eleanor became one of the few people who could penetrate the protective shell surrounding him. She remained devoted until his death, ensuring that his humanity, not just his policies, was preserved in memory. Eleanor lived quietly in later years, remarried, and continued writing until her death in 1967. Her life was shaped by the White House, but not defined by it. She embodied grace during crisis, loyalty during chaos, and creativity after heartbreak. Among Woodrow Wilson's daughters, Eleanor was the anchor, the one who held together the family's emotional core during the most tumultuous presidency of the early 20th century. The legacy of Woodrow Wilson and his three daughters is a story shaped by intellect, idealism, sacrifice, and the emotional cost of a presidency that changed the world and fractured a family. While Wilson carved his name into global history through war, diplomacy, and the League of Nations, it was his daughters who absorbed the private consequences of his public mission. Each lived a life that mirrored a different facet of their father's complexity: his brilliance, his blind spots, his convictions, and his fragility. Margaret Woodrow Wilson, the eldest, carried the weight of responsibility first. She stepped into the role of White House hostess after her mother's death, shouldering duty with quiet strength before ultimately rejecting the world of politics entirely. Her spiritual journey to India, where she lived as Nistha in the Aurobindo ashram, revealed a daughter searching not for legacy, but for inner truth, a truth far removed from the ambitions that defined her father. Jessie Woodrow Wilson Sayre, the reformer, inherited her father's moral urgency, but redirected it toward causes he struggled to prioritize. She fought for labor rights, women's political equality, and social justice long before these became mainstream political issues. Jessie embodied the progressive heart of Wilsonian idealism, the version of America that Wilson dreamed of, but often failed to deliver. Her premature death at 45 cut short a life of purpose and promised influence. Eleanor Randolph Wilson McAdoo, the youngest, remained closest to the epicenter of Wilson's presidency, emotionally, physically, and symbolically. As first daughter and later as the president's comfort and companion during his catastrophic decline, Eleanor became the human shield between Wilson and the unforgiving world of politics. Her devotion outlasted scandal, divorce, and heartbreak. She preserved her father's humanity even as history debated his legacy. Together, these three daughters illuminate the private cost of a presidency that reshaped the 20th century. While Woodrow Wilson fought to engineer peace abroad, his daughters fought for identity, belonging, and emotional grounding in a household ruled by ambition and shadowed by illness. Their stories remind us that behind every monumental leader stand the lives quietly bent around his ambitions, the hearts shaped by his absence, and the sacrifices the public never sees. The Wilson daughters left no dynastic political heirs, no presidential resumes, no monumental institutions. But what they did leave behind is a legacy equally profound. The courage to seek purpose beyond power, the strength to challenge the limits of their era, and the endurance to find themselves in the long shadow of history. Their lives, like their father's ideals, continue to echo, not through laws or treaties, but through the timeless human search for meaning, identity, and truth.